Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to talk about the heart murmurs and their location. It's going to be a sweet video talking about the heart and we're going to learn so much. If you like the topic, please click the like button and don't forget to click the notification button to have the video on time. Now, heart murmur and location, very useful in clinical practice and for us students too. Before we go into the depth of the topic, we need to understand what happened during the cardiac cycle inside the heart in relation with the four chambers and also the valves. Now I'm going to draw a basic, supposedly this is going to be our heart. This is the right ventricle, right atria, right ventricle, left atria, left ventricle, and here this is gonna be our tricuspid valve, and here our mitral valve. Our pulmonic valve is gonna come here, and then let's say our aortic valve. This is just a basic drawing just for understanding purposes. Now, what happened in the cardiac cycle? The left atrium gets the oxygenated blood from the two main pulmonary veins, and once they are dumped into the left atrium, that blood goes through the mitral valve, which the left ventricle, go through the aortic, and it pumps out to the whole body. And on the right side of the heart, the blood gets here, the deoxygenated blood gets here from the superior inferior vena cava and the coronary sinuses, dumped in the tricuspid, through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, pumps out through the pulmonary valve into the lungs, and the lungs are going to bring oxygen, and that blood returns here to the pulmonary vein oxygenated. So this is the basic of the cardiac circulation. Now, during the in the left side of the heart, let's see what happened during systolic and diastolic. So here we're gonna put here systolic and here diastolic. During systolic, the mitral valve should be closed, tricuspid valve should be closed, and aortic and pulmonary valve are the only valves that should be open to pump the blood out. So during systolic, our semilunar valve should be open, and the AV valve should be closed, right? SL valve, aortic and pulmonary open during systolic, pumping the blood out, and these two are closed. Now during diastolic, what happened? Diastolic, right atrium contract blood to get into the right ventricle through these AV valves. So here, AV valve open and SL close. Very basic. We're getting there. Now, what happens if there is a problem during systolic? What happens if this SL valve don't open here during systolic? That means there is an obstruction. If they don't open, that means there is a stenosis on this valve. And if there is a stenosis, that means you will hear that murmur at the time that they were supposed to be open, because they don't open as they were supposed to be open. So we're going to put here SL stenosis. So if this valve are stenotic, that's going to be your early systolic ejection murmur, because they're supposed to be open during early systolic, and if they can't open, that's where you're going to hear your murmur. Now, what if these AV valves are not closed? If the tricuspid and the mitral valves don't close themselves during systolic, that means there is a leak. That means they are regurgitating the blood is going back up, right? So you're going to hear this regurgitation sound during systolic. So AV regurgitation. That's where you're going to hear that. Now let's talk about diastolic. During diastolic, the atria are contracting, pumping the blood down into the ventricle. So what happens if these valves don't close during the diastolic? If they don't close while they are supposed to close, that means they are regurgitating the blood. So that is going to give you a diastolic murmur. SL regurgitation. Now we know that during diastolic, the tricuspid and the mitral valve should be open. So what happens if they don't open? That means there is stenosis. So here you're going to have your AV stenosis. So let's do a quick recap. During systolic, what kind of murmur you can hear? You can hear your aortic and pulmonary valve stenosis because they were supposed to be open and they don't open. And you can have your AV regurgitation because they were supposed to be closed, but there is a leak. And during diastolic, you're going to have your SL regurgitation because during diastolic, they are supposed to be closed, but they don't. They have a leak. So it's going to be your diastolic murmur. And your AV stenosis because during diastolic, they are supposed to be open and they don't open. Very simple. Now I'm going to talk about some disease that we can add to this scan. Now, let's say we have atrial septal defect. So during the atrial septal defect, there is a communication between the left atria and the right atria. And because the left atria has more blood, the pressures are higher over here, the blood will have a tendency to come to the right atria to make an equilibrium of pressure. Now, the right atria is not used to work with so much blood. So you're going to hear this murmur when the right atria is contracting because there is a lot of blood that it's not used to. So during its contraction, you're going to hear that murmur. And the right atria contracts during the diastolic to push the blood down here. So if the right atria contracts and you hear that murmur, it's going to be during diastolic. So your ASD will be here during diastolic. So here we have our ASD. It's going to be a diastolic sound. Now let's do the same thing on our VSD. VSD. So during the VSD, same concept, the blood will have a tendency to move from the left ventricle to the right ventricle. Right ventricle is not used to work with so much blood. So why that right ventricle is pumping out, and it's pumping now when? During systole. So why it's pumping now, you're going to hear that sound because there is a volume amount that it's not supposed to be working with. So your VSD is going to be your systolic sound. So here, VSD. And also, we also have continuous murmur that happen through all the cardiac cycle in both systolic and both diastolic. And it's going to be your patent ductal arteriosus. So basically, during your patent ductal arteriosus, let's say this is my aorta arch that crosses like this, and here my pulmonary valve here, and then there is a communication here between my aorta and pulmonary, which was supposed to be closed after the fetal life. If this remnant remains open, then you're going to have that continuous murmur throughout the cardiac cycle. And you also have the murmur called to and fro. In this murmur, basically both your aortic and pulmonary valve, they both have regurgitation and stenosis, which is not fun. But this is the basic of the understanding where we're supposed to listen to what at which phase of the cardiac cycle. If something is not doing what it's supposed to do, then here's the problem. Now let's look at the location of this murmur. Where can we locate them? So if here is my chest, I'm sorry. So here I have the right side, I have the left side. This is gonna be my second intercostal space on the right, second intercostal space on the left, third intercostal space, fourth intercostal space, all is on the left, and fifth intercostal space. Now here we have a mnemonic that we call apartment M. So A is for the aorta. So if you want to listen to aortic stenosis, you're gonna listen to the second intercostal space to the right side. Remember, when the aortic comes from the left ventricle, it crosses over. You have that aortic arch, right? So you're gonna listen to the aortic stenosis at the second intercostal space on the right side. Now here, this is the pulmonic area. So you're gonna listen to the pulmonic stenosis on the left side at the second intercostal space. Now we have this E, which corresponds to the Erb's point. So here is on the left sternal border where you're gonna listen to the SL regurgitation. So this is where you're gonna listen to your aortic and pulmonic valve regurgitation, right here, left sternal border. Now let's go to the fourth intercostal space, lower left sternal border, and this is gonna be your tricuspid area. So this is where you're gonna listen to your tricuspid regurgitation or stenosis. And here, this is your mitral valve area, is at the fifth intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, and then that's where you're gonna listen to your mitral valve stenosis or regurgitation, and they have a tendency to radiate through the axilla. Now they have different positions that you can listen better. I did not get into the full of that, not yet. But this is the main point, apartment M. So that's where you can have your sound. So aortic, pulmonary, the Erb's point is where you listen to SL regurgitation. And this is your tricuspid, lower left sternal border, and your mitral in the apex of the heart. Now there is something I did not talk about during this, and it's your mitral valve prolapse. So let's talk about it because it's really important. So during your diastolic, the left atrium is going to contract to push the blood into the left ventricle. Now, during your late diastolic, we have what we call the atrial kick. The atrial kick provides about 20 to 30% of your stroke volume. So these atrial kicks happen just before the end of your diastolic. It's where this atrial forcefully contract to squeeze out the little bit of the blood left in the atrium, and it's gonna dump right here, and then this is gonna mark the end of your diastolic. Now if you have a mitral valve prolapse, remember the valve prolapse by pushing the leaflet up. So if there is a prolapse here, you will not hear that sound until at the late diastolic when this atrial kick happens. Very important. Now let's put everything into one chart, and hopefully it helps us memorize all these concepts. So we're gonna have here systolic, diastolic, and continuous. And here we're gonna have early systolic, continuous, so throughout the systolic or pan-systolic, and then late systolic. And here we're gonna have extra sound, the extra sound, also called clicks. And in the clicks we're gonna have early or late clicks. So during diastole, we're gonna have early diastole, mid to late, late diastolic, and then we're gonna have extra sounds. These extra sounds are gonna be S3 and S4. And then continuous here, we're gonna have continuous 2 and 4. Now, during systolic, we say early systolic, what should happen? In systolic, the aortic and pulmonary valve should be open, while the mitral and tricuspid valve should be closed. So if these don't open, the aortic and pulmonary valve, during early systolic, you're gonna have that sound. So it's gonna be SL stenosis. Now remember, SL stenosis is gonna be heard in the base. Second intercostal space to the right for aorta, and second intercostal space to the left for pulmonary. So this is going to be your early systolic sound. Now, what kind of murmur can you hear throughout the systolic? It's going to be, remember, your AV valve during systolic, they should remain closed. Now, if they have a leak, you're going to hear that during systolic, but it's going to be like continuous sound. So this is going to be your AV regurgitation. So now we also talked about your ASD and your VSD, and we saw that during the VSD, the ventricle works with more blood, right? The ventricle works with more blood, so you're going to hear the VSD during systolic here. VSD. Now, late systolic sound, remember we talked about the mitral valve prolapse. So during the mitral valve prolapse is going to act as a regurgitating valve, but at the late of systolic, right? So this is where you're going to hear your mitral valve prolapse. Now we have extra sounds that are called clicks during systolic. You can hear them early, and early is gonna be your SL stenosis. Going back to the same thing. SL stenosis, we talk about it when the aortic and pulmonary valve can get open all the way to push the blood out. And also, if there is any dilatation in your root of aorta or pulmonary. Why the dilatation? Because during systolic, remember, the blood is pumped throughout the body. So if there is any part of the root that is enlarged, receiving that huge amount of blood is going to create a vasoconstriction reflex. And that's where you're going to have this early click during systolic. Now, late during systolic, it's going to be your mitral valve prolapse. Because remember, the mitral valve prolapse up, it never closed during systolic, and then you're gonna have to hear that during systolic, late systolic, when the valve is up, when the aortic valve is about to close and the mitral valve is about to open. That's where you hear your mitral valve prolapse. So this is just a summary. So we can do this together as I'm going, just think in your head what could happen and what could be the answer. So during diastolic, early diastolic, what should happen during diastolic? Your aortic and pulmonary valve should be closed while your mitral and tricuspid valve should be open. But this sound is going to happen during early diastolic. Diastolic is the continuation of systolic. So if at first place, these valve, so let's say the aortic and pulmonary valve, right, during diastolic is supposed to be closed. So if after the systolic, they never even close after the systolic and we're starting the diastolic phase, that's where you're going to hear your early diastolic murmur. So it's when we have SL regurgitation. SL regurgitation, early diastolic. And remember, you're going to listen to them to the left sternal border, right? Now, mid to late during diastolic, our AV valve should be open to let the blood flow into the ventricle. If there are stenosis, we will not hear that. So AV stenosis. And then during the late diastolic, is even if we have a severe stenosis that persists throughout the diastolic and mark at the late diastolic. Now let's talk about the ASD. So we said that during the atrial septal defect, the right atrial works with so much blood, and because that right atrium has to pump the blood down into the right ventricle during the diastolic. So this is going to give us a diastolic murmur, and it's going to be here. We're going to put it here, our ASD. Now, let's talk about the extra sound. We have S3 and S4 that happens during diastolic. So S3 here also called ventricular gallops. So S3 happens early diastolic. So because the ventricle is enlarged, is dilated, like you know about dilated cardiomyopathy. So it has a lot of volume. It's engorged with volume. So that when the left atria is pumping the blood, you hear the sound of congestion, you know. And with the S4, which is called atrial gallop, it happens late, and here the right atrium is pumping against an hypertrophy ventricle. Hypertrophy ventricle, like the chamber is reduced, the diameter is reduced because of all the hypertrophy muscle, so there's less space to pump all this amount of blood, and that pressure is what you hear in the atrial gallop S4. It's just something to mention that S3 is normal with kids because they have a strong heart and they're dealing with a lot of volume for their body surface area. So S3 is normal for the kids. Now let's go to continuous murmur. So we have through all the cardiac cycle, systolic and diastolic, and that's gonna be our patent ductal arteriosus. And we mentioned for the 2 and 4 is when your semilunar valve, aortic and pulmonic valves both have stenosis and regurgitation. Very sad. So this is it. Everything simplified, and this is what I got for you guys. If you like this and you want to keep getting my video, don't forget to press the bell button. Leave me a comment down below and see you on my next video. Thank you.